Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the moderator of the second plenary session of the Atlantic Dialogues, anchor and journalist at NBC News and MSNBC, Richard Louis. And our speakers for this session, Mohammed Mehdi bin Said, Minister of Youth, Culture and Communication in Morocco. Jessica de Alba Ulua, Professor at SPAI University of Maine and UANL. Migdalia Mashin, Regional Minister for Universities, Science and Culture at the Canary Islands. And Ramayad, Senior Director at the Atlantic Council Africa Center. A brief intro video of the session will be now played. Bridging divides and building mutual understanding. It addresses shared challenges through cultural exchange, arts, and heritage while promoting a cohesive Atlantic identity rooted in shared histories and collective memories. By countering narratives of division, cultural diplomacy opens pathways for dialogue on critical issues, such as migration, social inclusion, and sustainability, while advancing economic collaboration through creative industries. Governments, international organizations, and civil society are vital in preserving heritage and driving peace building, development, and integration. How can cultural diplomacy help address shared challenges such as migration, social inclusion, and sustainability within Atlantic communities? In what ways can arts and heritage be leveraged to build a cohesive Atlantic identity that transcends national boundaries? What strategies can governments, international organizations, and civil society adopt to support cultural initiatives contributing to peace building and regional integration?
First off, very good afternoon, Atlantic Dialogues. It is good to be here with all of you here in Rabat, Morocco. We are about to dig into the topic of cultural diplomacy, reconnecting Atlantic communities through arts and heritage. And we look forward to all of your interventions as we go throughout our conversation. We have 30 minutes set aside at the end, but as we move along, if you do have questions and it is burning, I will perhaps recognize you and we can inject that into our conversation. I want to start, first of all, Mr. Minister, and I thank you for being here today. Morocco is certainly, when we think about the very idea of cultural diplomacy, one of the leaders in this very approach when it comes to the global South. Tell me about what you do related to this very topic and some of the ideas that you've entertained over the time that you've been a minister.
To start with, thank you for the invitation. And I see that we have a very seasoned to diplomacy and culture and arts, because I see a lot of our partners here in, just like Naila Tazi, the president of the Gnawa Festival, which is one of the tools that we use, the Gnawa Festival, to really allow the cultural diplomacy to be better deployed and well known on the field, and which also has a very significant international public. And starting from Gnawa, this is the style of folk music, and Naila is before me, so I'll say, of course, this is the force of the Moroccan culture, and it has its root, which is also participating to diplomacy, and which allows the political aspect. Gnawa is a merger or a meeting of different civilizations, talking about history. This territory of Morocco, with its sub-Saharan underpinning, and the story and the history that allowed Morocco to be what it is: multicultural, multi-sheen, multi-colorful, which is important to highlight highlight here, and which, thanks to another strength of this cultural blend, has created and given both an Arab, sub-Saharan culture, Mediterranean culture, and also Judeo-Muslim culture. And this is this very strength that made it possible today that the Gnawa style, of course, I mentioned Gnawa because I'm seeing that Naila is before me, and she's the chair of the Gnawa festival. And this gives to Gnawa, of course, this multiculturality which is encompassed in Morocco in view of the different aspects that we've mentioned, in view of its Mauritanian cradle, in view of its sub-Saharan underpinning, all of which is making the Morocco of today. And this very strength can also contaminate positively the other part or side of the Atlantic, because talking about the United States of America, the whole Atlantic is also a cultural blend, maybe a little more violent, quote unquote, than the long history of Morocco. But this is the multiculturalism that allows today to have several styles of culture and music, which today have come to lead to jazz, among other musical styles or genres. Today's Morocco tries to show through first the protection of its cultural heritage, and also through the beneficiation and the given greater value to its heritage. It showcases this is indeed a Moroccan heritage, but which underpinnings that also include the Mediterranean and sub-Saharan area, which is also a plus that can help official channel diplomacy to give much more reasons for or rationale in defending the interests of Morocco. So for us, the first ambassadors of Morocco was artists, interpreters of arts, and the culture has also been instrumental in diplomacy. Culture is softer than the pure political diplomacy, the interest-based diplomacy. Culture creates, not to say installs, and creates and gives greater value to the aspects, community-related aspects, which makes it possible to more readily accept partnerships and other like decisions. Not to say also, coming back to the Roman and Greco-Roman also history. So today it's much less violent. This cultural diplomacy can, for me, be the best arm, not to say weapon, to really make who we are as Moroccans better known for hitherto communities that do not know that.
Tell us about your teachings, your research.
Like to start saying, building up in what the minister said, I think that we need to understand that, for instance, for Mexico, we go back to the 1920s with the Secretary of Education, Vasconcelos, was starting with cultural diplomacy going to the world, mainly to the US, but to the rest of the world. And we have that continuing. Going on. But we need to move a little bit farther than that. And I would like to bring up the concept of heritage diplomacy, which is something that also he talked about. Heritage diplomacy is just a part of cultural diplomacy which brings an identity to a community. Mm-hmm. And it's not like dividing in a sense, it's just learning who you are and where do you come from. From Mexico, it's a very distinctive feature, and it's like not like in any other nation, because we are not Spaniards, we are not indigenous, but we're a mix.
Right.
And that is something that is very unique to our culture and our heritage. And for us to transcend just cultural diplomacy, to go to the commonplaces of Mexican food and dances and Frida Kahlo, everybody knows who she is, we need to go further for building up a strategy of heritage diplomacy abroad, instead, for instance, to trying to get back art, archaeological pieces from abroad,
right,
to use them as a tool of diplomacy abroad for our diaspora, but also for building bridges across the communities in the host country, for instance, that may not know what Mexicans are or where do they come from. So this is something that we have looked into in different publications, and this new concept of heritage diplomacy putting forward to be used as a strategy of the state, not only foreign policy, but as a tool of foreign policy.
The idea that we were here too. We were here too. Heritage diplomacy.
Yeah.
Because you're talking about centuries, you're talking about millennia of different countries and different groups. It's part of that message that's saying we were part of this conversation, because often it is seen, no, this is new. This was a comment that was made earlier in conversations here today on the first day, that why do we say New South when we need to understand what the South is to start? And those are both relevant points. But I just wanted to underline...
Which is not new, yes.
I just wanted to underline that the heritage means thousands of years potentially. To you, my friend, Madam Minister, tell us about yourself and why and what you have done to the topic that we're here to gather to discuss, which is cultural diplomacy.
Nosotros en Canarias.
We at the Canary Islands, well, the Canary Islands is a set of islands. We are only 100 kilometers away from Morocco. And in this case, the relation that we have with Morocco has many historical and cultural ties. Our historical relation is seen as a way to relate with countries in a different way. And we think this is important in our current world. This is not a new concept. This actually appeared many years ago. But this is something new, the way we perceive it and how we can, interact with other countries. Cultural diplomacy, apart from art and culture, looks for something else. It aims to approach through art to different countries and also through academic education, culture, research, the scientific world, and that's how it looks forward to getting closer to other countries. In our case, everything that has to do with Africa, everything that has to do with Morocco is basic because we have many cultural aspects that we share in common, and there are many topics that we need to tackle as an Atlantic region because we face some common problems: water management, migration, climate change, sustainability. So the Atlantic region has all these topics in common, and cultural diplomacy is fundamental for us to explain how we forge all these cultural ties with countries.
On this, you have done quite some work with the Atlantic Council as well with the Policy Center on this very question. Tell us about yourself as well as that work that you've done relevant to this question of cultural diplomacy.
Yes, thank you very much. This is really meaningful that the Policy Center for the New South decide to include in a plenary session the creative sector and cultural diplomacy. As you just said, I run the Africa Center at the Atlantic Council in Washington, D.C., and we have been partnering with the Policy Center for 10 years. And I was very happy and very proud last year when we co-authored this very important report on the impact and importance on African creative industries. Why it's very important? Because obviously, when I arrived in this job and brought up this question of cultural diplomacy, people at the Atlantic Council were very surprised, what this has to do with foreign policy,
right?
What this has to do with diplomacy, culture. So people were thinking maybe because she comes from Paris and so she thinks that culture matters. But no, you don't need to.
How dare they?
No, exactly. And culture is important as a tool for diplomacy, so soft power. It's very important, and Mr. Minister just reminded how Morocco uses culture as a tool for its diplomacy and its soft power. We are talking about arts, literature. We are talking about fashion, music, movies, also gaming, and even sports. I think it was yesterday, Saudi Arabia has been designated to host the FIFA World Cup in football.
That's right.
And we know that a lot of... And Morocco, of course, 2030.
You think it was announced? Are you kidding me? Everybody was talking about it yesterday.
obviously. And we have also this sports program with Morocco, because it's important to understand that through creative industries and sports, not only you can promote a certain idea of your country, of your vision of the world, but it's also a market, a growing economic market. And it's very important to push the investors to invest there. There is a huge potential of job creation. For example, Nigeria. Nigeria is very well known for its film industry, Nollywood. And Nollywood is the fastest growing industry in entertainment in the world, beyond Hollywood, you know. And Bollywood is the number one. So this is a potential. It's not a potential. It's the reality. 300,000 jobs created in Nigeria through the creative sector. And according to UNESCO, there is a potential in Africa of creating $12 billion of revenue in the next years. So there is. It's not only a soft power. It's also an economic power. And I would add that it's very important for Africans to talk about themselves, how they see themselves through arts, through music, through movies, and how they see the world. And that's why, the cultural diplomacy for me means something important. And UNESCO represents the UN organization in charge of culture, and there's no better or diplomatic organization than UNESCO to promote that idea.
Not bad, as they say. What was the title of this report, or the main idea, if you remember the title of that report that you and the Policy Center issued?
Oh, this was about the African creative industries and their economic impact. Yeah. And since then, we have published new reports. Last week at the Capitol Hill Congress, we presented a new report on intellectual property rights.
Got it.
Because, as you know, African artists, they don't live very well with from their arts. They are underestimated.
Yes.
Because there is a lack a lack of frameworks.
Yeah.
You know, and it's very important to recognize their talent.
That's right.
And support them to monetize their talent.
This is intellectual capital. It should be protected.
Exactly.
This is African intellectual capital.
Exactly.
To all of you, all of our participants and conferees here, we have a question for you, and this is the question. From 1 to 6, 1 being the lowest and 6 being the highest, what is the effectiveness of cultural diplomacy? If you could go to your app, you notice that it's 1 to 6. You cannot pick 3 or 4. There's nothing in the middle. From 1 to 6, what is the effectiveness of cultural diplomacy? All right. There are 20 of you that have participated. I'm counting. All right, let's get our first reaction. Jessica, what's your reaction to the numbers coming in?
Well, I think everybody knows that talking about culture is something more soft and pleasant than talking about security and conflict all the time, which is why sometimes we tend to look at those topics because we're just so tired of conflict and problems all the time. So I think it's a good tool and option for foreign ministers, for education, for research, for the think tanks. And as you were saying as well, it's a tool of soft power, though we need to also remember, to my point of view, countries that claim to use soft power, they should also have some hard power to be heard. And the countries that do not have that hard power, well, need to work a little bit harder than the rest for making those soft power initiatives count, which is why culture and education should be at the top of the list in everything.
Madam Minister, what number would you give it? And how do you think we're doing on this reaction from our conferees? You can.
Well, the numbers speak by themselves, right? We agree that culture is a tool, but we need to perceive culture as a tool that is not subordinated to politics. It has to be culture based on promoting the values of a state, of a country, because that shows how we can relate. And I think that's the key. But not only state, we're also talking about civil society, NGOs, universities, because they also share and do outreach. When we know each other and we are not afraid, everything is easier because dialogue is a tool to get close to each other. And right now, that's what we need. We need to have bridges of communication with the countries. If culture is a tool, that's great, because culture also helps us, as my colleague was saying, right? It's not only us respecting our story, we also need to respect our identity as a country. We have many countries here, and everyone have their own identity. Actually, when you meet someone, you say, I come from this country or that country, because we are proud of our country. And we are here through our words. When we communicate, we portray where we come from in a very chilled environment, and we say towards where we want to go. So what's a question we need to phrase? What do we want to achieve from culture, and how are we going to use it? That's a question that we should have in today's dialogue.
Rama, what number would you give it? I kind of have a feeling that what it might be. And what's your reaction about 1 in 4 saying, well, not so effective, right? That's that below the middle.
That doesn't mean that it's not the case. That can also mean that decision makers don't use culture as a diplomatic tool.
Right.
I'm not sure. There's so many heads of states in the world using, and by saying that, I'm thinking of what happened a few days ago in Paris, precisely, how the reopening of the cathedral has been a huge platform for heads of state to meet Donald Trump and Zelensky.
Did that surprise you? Because I was watching, obviously, as being a news, I was saying, we're covering Notre Dame like we have never covered Notre Dame before.
Yeah, that's the power of cultural diplomacy that has been deployed as a powerful tool to help France to get influence on the international stage at the very moment when France didn't have so many influence on the event that were happening in Ukraine. And you had on the same stage, in the same cathedral, Zelensky and Donald Trump and the Élysée Palace talking about the next steps for peacebuilding in Ukraine. So this is the exact an example of what cultural diplomacy can do. And speaking of the United States, we know how the American soft power, the American values, American culture, from, I don't know, Coca-Cola to movies to music, helped the US win the Cold War. It was much more powerful than any hard power, any nuclear power, because the attractiveness of this American way of life was so huge to people from Eastern Europe that the Soviet Union could not be a rival, a serious rival to the United States because of these tools. So what I see here is maybe it's the participants would like to see more culture in diplomacy and may regret that it's not always the case.
Or we're getting to learn about it, as you started by saying.
Yes.
Madam Minister, and to all of our discussants here, in one sentence only, please describe what cultural diplomacy is to the 1 in 4 that say, not so effective. What is it in one sentence?
Difícil una frase. Diría que la diplomacia cultural es una herramienta eficaz de relacionarse los países, de acercarnos y de trabajar de manera diferente a como se hace en muchas ocasiones.
Perfectamente, gracias. And what is the one sentence?
One sentence. I would say that cultural diplomacy is the new hard power.
Mm.
Yeah.
Of course.
Mr. Minister, in one sentence, I know they trained this in the diplomatic corps to say things in one sentence, but in one sentence, what is cultural diplomacy?
En plusieurs phrases alors.
I'll use a few sentences. So culture is, first of all, a legacy, and this is a gift that has been passed on from our forefathers, which turns into where the spin-offs is economy. When we talk about when we talk about ICC, it's also about culture. So this economy, this new cultural economy, earlier you spoke about gaming. Well, it's also a way of bringing people, communities together. So the primary need today of populations, you spoke about migration, is because there's actually a need for people who are seeking employment. And if culture is connected to new technology, to digital, is also a way to provide a solution to these populations. I'm speaking to my continent, Africa, but also other continents. This is a model that we're trying to defend in Morocco. You spoke about gaming earlier, and we're currently creating the first gaming city here in Rabat. But the idea is to take things further, is to involve other communities of developers in Rwanda, for instance, or in Senegal, because the idea that Morocco has been advocating for a few years now is to support these communities that are African in nature. That's what culture is all about. It's legacy, and it's also the future.
One red tie to another. Say that in one sentence. in one sentence, if you can.
Vous savez, mon parti.
So my party is the authenticity and modernity party. So I think this defines what culture is all about today.
Okay, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Red tie. Jessica, one sentence.
Yeah, well, Ambassador Amhrani would say building bridges, but I would say that cultural diplomacy is fostering mutual understanding through cultural exchange, and that is very important for societies to be understood overall.
Again, to our discussants, feel free to interrupt each other. I'm a cable news anchor, and I'm used to that. Be nice to each other along the way, but I do look forward to the interaction that you have.
Yeah, I would not interrupt, but I would take advantage now to, for instance, talking about what Rama was saying in the Cold War. I think that what broke the Soviet Union was not necessarily the way of life or the culture of the US, which is very, very rich, and we cannot just talk about one specific culture, but it was mainly economical. So they were literally broke, and that's what gave the US the winning. But I would agree with the fact that culture is always in the lowest of financed assets of a nation. So when you look at the budgets of the governments, you are going to find that they dedicate a very small budget to culture, and that is unthinkable if you want really to solve the problems that we all have, that is with mutual understanding.
Yeah, just one point. I absolutely agree with that. In Africa, for example, despite everything we just said, the importance of culture, it's only 1% of the continental budget. Only a few countries dedicate a significant budget to culture. Among them I mentioned Nigeria, also Morocco. Morocco
1%.
Much more. Except these countries I'm just mentioning. The others, it's just the average. It's 1%, and
wow.
And Morocco is an exception because the country has always, in the 50s, for example, the country hosted films, movies, of many. Albert Hitchcock, L'homme qui en savait trop, a été tourné au Maroc, ou encore Orson Welles, Othello de Orson Welles en 1950, dans les années 52, a été tourné aussi au Maroc.
Was also shot in Morocco, not to mention the many festivals in Morocco that were held in Morocco. So Morocco has indeed used culture as a means for diplomacy, and has managed to project itself through culture. And this is a real asset that Morocco boasted that not everyone understands. And this is why maybe artists in Africa can't afford to live off of their arts. And so it's true that there are some do use digital arts, and as we can see that, we can see that in New York, where there are, for instance, Delphine Diallo that is selling her digital artwork for several hundreds of thousands of dollars, which is absolutely incredible. The virtual museums that are opening up here and there, and that make it possible to reconstitute the lost African art. These are all incredible initiatives that re-enable Africans through these modern technological tools to convey this idea about Africans and Africa and what it has to say to the world.
Of the budget, what's the number it should be? Just give me the number.
It should be, I don't know.
Just you and me.
5%. Let's say 5 would be.
What number you say?
100.
100%. Oh, wow. Yes. Yes. He and I
will be very nice with the ambassador, of course.
definitely a fiscal conservative.
I think he's asking that budget for his ministry.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. What percent should it be?
I'll go with NATO, 3% of the GDP.
3% of the GDP. What percentage should it be?
El porcentaje que ayuda a cubrir lo que quiere implementar el país en ese momento. Eso sería ideal. Eso siempre es una lucha en los presupuestos. Siempre, siempre. Pero hoy en día, con la globalización, lo que nos ha pasado también es que se han como derribado fronteras y la cultura tiende a homogeneizarse, o sea, a ser única. Entonces, hoy más que nunca tenemos que reivindicar nuestra identidad cultural desde el punto de vista de las artes, literatura.
From the point of view from the literature, cinema, the arts, handcrafts of every country. We have to work on all of these fronts so that, as I was saying before, that we can feel proud of that and also to vindicate it. What do I mean by that? In a globalized world, we need our own identities more than ever because it may feel like there are no boundaries, no frontiers anymore. And we need our past to define where we are today. Our identity is constantly evolving. We will never be what we were in the past, and we won't be what we are today. But we can actually shape our identity for today.
Echoing what Jessica was saying a little bit earlier. And when we think about the available images and content that's been documented when it comes to cultural representation of the global South, it needs to be documented, doesn't it? Because as we look at the other implements of the way that all of us and future generations will access this heritage, we need to have it documented. As we look at the simplistic application of ImageNet and AI today, if we don't have these in the record books, we don't have them documented, then they won't be known or seen or understood to the levels that they need to be. So I will ask all of our conferees another question, if you can go to the screen. And this question for you, leading from that, is give me an example that you may have seen and that you can think of that is of cultural diplomacy that has worked. Well, this is, all right. We have some earnest students in the room. They were way ahead of my question. Festival, K-pop, cinema, and others. Oh. Mr. Minister, what do you think? Give me an example, either reflecting from what our other fellow conferees are saying, or an example that you like to bring up. When you have, when you have that 1 minute in an elevator, and you're telling them, hey, cultural diplomacy, this is the way it works. This is how it works. Let me give you an example. What's your 1 minute example?
Je vais être peut-être un peu très classique, mais je pense qu'un livre peut tout simplement faire changer, faire évoluer l'idée d'un décideur. Et peut-être parfois, quand on a des décisions à prendre, un bon livre peut nous conseiller d'aller vers des décisions qui sont plus pacifiques qu'autre chose. Et donc, la lecture reste pour moi une force, elle a une force que la diplomatie culturelle qu'on devrait utiliser davantage en soutenant justement nos écrivains, nos éditeurs, et en soutenant davantage cette industrie qui malheureusement est en train de connaître des problèmes de par l'évolution aussi du digital. Et bien sûr, il y a les festivals, il y a le cinéma, on a parlé tout à l'heure de Gnawa, parce que c'est des moments de rassemblement. Mais connaissant quelques-uns de nos décideurs, je pense qu'un bon livre ferait l'affaire.
Thank you. Any other reactions from our discussants here?
I will give you 2 examples.
And reflect to what's being said up here as well. I don't actually see digital strategy up here anywhere.
So please raise your hand. Who knows what tequila is?
I don't know if I want to raise my hand.
Who knows what taco is? So I would not like to go to common places, but for Mexico, who knows what a mariachi is?
Oh, look at the hands go so high.
So this is one example of cultural diplomacy from Mexico that has worked a lot and very well, but I insist that we need to go beyond that. As Rama was saying, artists are not valorized a lot, valorisé.
Yes,
don't know the
valued, yes.
Valued. So there is a program in the foreign ministers of Mexico that buys in exchange of taxes, the paintings and the artwork of our artists and displays it in the different embassies and cultural centers that we have worldwide. So that is also one place where artists can really develop themselves and gain a little bit of money by doing this.
Sure.
So that is also something that works.
Yeah. And adding to the conversation, we can look in history. Again, going to the last century, there was an Afro-Asian South-to-South cultural diplomatic effort that worked quite well. That is one example that this has been done by the Global South for not just this year or last 5 years or 10 years, but it's been done for decades. Going back to the word cloud, to the two of you, please react to what we have on the word cloud, and then tell us also of an example that you have that you like. Tequila and tacos have already been used.
Canarias geográficamente está en África.
The Canary Islands belong to Africa, but culturally we are close to Latin America and we belong to Spain. So we are definitely multicultural, and one can see that by the great flows of migrants going from and to the Canary Islands, Latin America, etc. So, to give you one current example that is very powerful for our islands, we have the international music festivals. We have actually the main one that takes place in February concerning classical music, and it's been ongoing for more than 40 years. I think that's a great example of cultural diplomacy. We've hosted conductors and musicians from all over the world, but we also have our own history that connects us with Morocco. We have our autonomous statute. We are an Atlantic archipelago, and that's what defines us. We are islands. That's what defines our culture in many different ways. We've been talking about the evolution of culture, and the minister talked about books. Also, libraries have evolved a lot. In the past, libraries used to be places for research and reading, but today they are multifaceted spaces that have given rise to new technologies, even AI. The power of reading and culture is what makes a country thrive. And even today, training today is still fundamental for one region to progress. So it is very important to take culture and cultural diplomacy into the equation. Our heritage is part of our cultural diplomacy that we are doing here today. But with tequila, that's something I not compete against. There's just examples. Also, the colleague mentioned cinema, reading, and all of this belongs to cultural diplomacy.
Thank you so much.
Si vous permettez, je vais me rajouter une chose. La diplomatie politique, c'est du court terme, c'est des résultats qu'on cherche à avoir parce qu'on a un agenda politique, alors que la diplomatie culturelle, c'est du long terme, mais avec des résultats beaucoup plus intéressants, beaucoup plus acceptés par les communautés. Et c'est ça la force de cette diplomatie culturelle quand on lui donne son temps et, pour revenir à votre première question, quand on lui donne les moyens et les vrais moyens.
Et de la finesse.
Oui. Non, je voudrais juste rebondir sur l'idée du livre promu par Monsieur le ministre pour ajouter effectivement que c'est un outil puissant. Je vais citer un pays frère du Maroc où je suis née, qui est le Sénégal, qui en 2021 a gagné tous les prix littéraires avec le prix Goncourt de Bougarsar, le prix Boubacar Boris Diop aussi a gagné le prix Neustadt, ou encore David Diop qui a gagné le Booker Prize. Tout ça la même année. Et le Sénégal a pu, fidèle à cette tradition d'être un pays géographiquement assez petit, mais ayant cette capacité sur le plan culturel de se projeter et d'apparaître beaucoup plus grand sur la scène universelle qu'elle ne l'est géographiquement. C'est ça la force aussi de la culture. Et au passage, le livre provoque des crises diplomatiques, peut provoquer des crises diplomatiques, parce que l'art, ça peut être dangereux. La culture peut être dangereuse pour certains. Par exemple, on a vu en Afghanistan, lorsque j'ai visité l'Afghanistan quand j'étais membre du gouvernement, j'ai été visiter les Bouddhas de Bamiyan qui avaient été détruits par les talibans. Pourquoi détruire des sculptures? Les djihadistes, quand ils ont avancé sur le Sahel, la première chose qu'ils ont fait, c'était de détruire des œuvres d'art. Pourquoi détruire et brûler des livres? Parce que l'art peut être dangereux, l'art peut être un outil diplomatique qui fait peur aux mouvements les plus rétrogrades, réfractaires au progrès que l'art porte nécessairement. Donc voilà, c'est le livre en plus, c'est un témoignage pour l'éternité. Et donc on dit que effectivement, à travers les mots qui restent, eh bien, c'est une civilisation qui témoigne de son existence pour l'éternité. Donc, rien que pour ça, je partage l'avis du ministre.
Et pourtant, si vous me permettez, c'est effrayant le niveau de lecture des jeunes générations.
Absolument.
Ça s'abaisse de plus en plus. Et ça me fait peur.
Le défi, c'est le défi.
We have 5 minutes until we go to Q&A. So we will go out to the audience very shortly. How do we measure the success of cultural diplomacy? And how does it solve, going to the conversation before ours, how does it solve inflation? How does it solve unemployment?
If Donald Trump and Zelensky make peace in Ukraine after the Notre Dame Accord,
yes.
Why not?
Evidently, there was a lot of prayer there, but
it will have an impact on prices and
yes.
inflation, I think.
Oh, you in your report though, obviously there's some economic activity that comes from cultural arts exchanges.
I have to say, the report
yes.
has been authored by Ambassador Alaoui, who was the representative of Morocco to the African Union. So she's the real person you should talk to about that, because she promoted that vision on behalf of our two organizations. So, yeah.
Any other reflections on this idea of how do we measure the efficacy of these programs? How does it solve the big problems?
C'est ce que je disais tout à l'heure. C'est pour moi la diplomatie culturelle, c'est le long terme. Il faut lui laisser le temps pour voir d'abord, parce qu'elle se dirige vers les populations, vers la communauté. Et elle fait accepter, elle donne la possibilité de connaître l'autre. Tout à l'heure, je voyais sur l'écran, on parlait de Rambo, on parlait de McDonald's, on parlait de pas mal de choses qui viennent de l'autre côté de l'Atlantique. Mais finalement, grâce justement à Hollywood, grâce à cette gastronomie nouvelle venant de l'autre côté de l'Atlantique, on a connu les États-Unis avant d'y aller. Et donc forcément, par la suite, on peut accepter des accords économiques, des accords politiques. Et à nous, maintenant aussi, de l'autre côté de l'Atlantique, à nous aussi, dans notre continent africain, de mieux se faire connaître, pour que demain, ça puisse impacter, non pas uniquement sur le volet politique, mais ce qui intéresse encore une fois ces jeunes générations dont vous parlez, c'est le volet économique, c'est la recherche de l'emploi. Comment renverser la vapeur aussi vers ce continent-là. Et je pense que la culture, la diplomatie culturelle, parce que pourquoi tout à l'heure je vous disais 100% du budget, parce qu'elle a le savoir, elle a l'éducation, elle a le tourisme, elle a l'histoire, mais elle a aussi l'économie. Donc elle mérite un soutien, elle mérite, et face aux défis qu'on connaît aujourd'hui, à savoir l'intelligence artificielle, tout ce qui est la robotisation aujourd'hui des usines et autres, les nouveaux métiers, c'est la culture. Le gaming, vous en parlez, c'est 80 métiers aujourd'hui le gaming. C'est 300 milliards de dollars de chiffre d'affaires. Quid de la part africaine? L'autre défi aujourd'hui au Maroc, c'est de ramener 1%. Pourquoi? Pour de l'emploi maroco-marocain, mais aussi maroco-africain.
Thank you. This conversation has been so energetic. My translator battery has gone 0, so I don't know if I can get another one really
will
quickly
translate for you.
because it's been so energetic. All of you pull the energy away from it, which is fantastic. Very quickly here before the Q&A, again addressing that question.
I think we need to see that in two levels. One is the government and what the government can do about it, which is going back to public diplomacy, and it's like getting the other to know you. And that is going to foster more relations overall. But then we have also the society level. We cannot wait for the government to do everything for us. We need to be an entrepreneur, and we need to go and look for things. It's a big opportunity to look for different alternatives that are going to bring jobs to people. It's not only, yes, artists and crafts are undervalued, but it is up to us to also look for value where people give
How
none.
would you measure it, though? I mean, just between you and me.
No, just looking at the understanding of the people, for instance, how much would an American or a Moroccan would know a Mexican?
Gotcha. Very good. How would you measure this?
El éxito se mide cuando perdura en el tiempo, una política cultural. Coincido con
A cultural policy. I agree with the minister. So that a cultural program that implements policies works, it has to be stable over time without having into account who governs the country. And once society accepts that, then, that's for sure something successful in cultural values.
I'm going to go out to the audience now. Let me grab a mic very quickly. Who has a question? If you could state your name and where you're from. We have several mics around. Okay, let's start over here. I will hold the mic.
Okay.
Please stand. Thank you.
I love this discussion. I just really loved it. But I'd like to emphasize another point. For music, arts, culture, not just soft power. It's a powerful tool of development. It creates a huge industry. It employs young people, technical people, people of every age, and then it does all the good things you want it to do. Like know each other. But my point is, government must invest in arts and culture. As you pointed out, artists are usually so undervalued. Their work is stolen from them. This is something government must do. Invest in arts and culture from the beginning, at a young age, build up a whole public, and let not arts and music be the enjoyment of only the rich. Only rich people that can pay high tickets, Lincoln Center, no. We should have festivals, musical events, etc., that everybody, that is the best form of democracy.
Thank you. And what, your name and where you're from?
Oh, well, my name is Isabel Sarkok. I am now from the United States, but I'm from Mauritius.
Very good. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. A moderate supporter of cultural diplomacy. Any reactions here from the dais? We're making our way that way. Please go ahead. Any reactions?
We agree.
Okay. All right. Any counter to that, by the way? Okay. Here, and then we'll go. Yes.
Yeah.
Merci beaucoup, Hassan Saoud, chercheur à l'Institut Royal des études.
Thank you very much. I'm Hassan San, researcher of the Strategic Research Center. I have a comment. There is an absence of the culinary diplomacy here. Culinary diplomacy is very important. I hope the gentleman was talking about culinary diplomacy. We haven't seen it in this discussion. And Honorable Minister, I'd like to address this question to you. Shouldn't we actually be synergizing all these events to really consolidate all this intangible, immaterial heritage and legacy under a single pillar? And why are not we involving the capacity of Morocco to organize this event? Because the world is recognizing and acknowledging the capacity of Morocco in terms of perfect organization, be it sports events, be it cultural events, and of course, this should be part and parcel of this legacy and this heritage. Thank you.
Back here. Be kind.
Yes, I'm very kind. Today, after listening to this discussion, I'm afraid to lose my job.
Oh.
After 45 years of diplomacy, we are talking about cultural diplomacy, economic diplomacy, climate change. I agree with that. But there are only two. There is only one diplomacy. And I want to comfort you with your vision. Last week, I organized important cultural activity in Washington. We and Panama, with music from Panama and Morocco and playing fusion. And exhibition, thanks to the minister, I came to see him some few months ago because I need some, not money, but need some products. And he gave me some paintings. Of paintings of the young artists from Tetuan.
You can ask for money now, though.
No, I asked him. No, that's why I'm taking the floor today, because I want to ask him something. But I'm criticizing Rama. Rama, you didn't come. You were invited.
Really?
Yes.
I have no. We can talk about that later.
So clearly there's some personal vendettas here about who showed up for the cultural event. Very good. That's nice if it comes down to that, isn't it? It's quite nice. Please, I'm making my way.
Hi, just a quick comment. Rama, you talked earlier on about how when you first brought up cultural industries in Washington, the think tanks, people were kind of shocked that it was important. I had exactly the same experience in Washington for 12 years. I moved to California, and the first thing that people said to me was, what are you going to do about cultural industries? What are you going to do about cultural diplomacy? And the reason for that is, of course, because of the economic importance of that in the state of California. The gaming industry is worth $44 billion. Hollywood is worth $44 billion. Once you begin to add that up, you begin to see why it matters in dollars and cents in people's pockets. And I know that's not all of cultural diplomacy, but then you begin to look at K-pop, which came up in our word map. And K-pop as an export is close to $1 billion in revenue for the Korean economy. It's hugely important, and that's where you can begin to put some numbers. I know that's only just financial, but I think it really shows the impact of this.
Which was the question earlier, right? Any quick reactions from our panelists? Otherwise, I'm going to keep on going. You want to?
Yeah. No? Ambassador, where is Ambassador Amrani? I'm so sorry,
mais
je vais me rattraper quand on repartira à Washington. No, yes, I agree with you. And then, shared experience, there has been some reaction, though, because since then, I mean, maybe 4 years after these first skeptical reactions, we have been able to have an agreement with the State Department on the occasion of the U.S.-Africa Summit, and it opened at the African American Museum of History and Culture. And we have been able to feature a lot of African artists, a lot of debates, and having them discuss with African president and the vice president, Secretary Blinken, and a lot of people. So, and we wanted to have this kind of convening, African artists and these officials together, having exchanges about the economic impact of the creative sector. And a few months later, President Biden just issued an executive order about investing in African creative industries. So it's a lot of work because this needs to be documented, like you said, you know. But I do think that African artists need, their space is beyond Africa. Remember this movie, Black Panther. It featured so many African artists, African actors, and so many young Africans were proud to see their continent, I mean, maybe the future of their continent represented like that, you know. And it changed a lot in terms of well-being, of mindset. This impact may be, I don't know if you can measure that impact, but it makes people feel better, I think.
Yes, and more. Please.
Ian Lesser from the German Marshall Fund of the United States in Brussels. It's a wonderful conversation. I'm totally on board with what you're all trying to do, but I have a question for you about the context for it, because in other sessions, I'm sure we'll be discussing this, you know, that we're in a moment now where identity politics, nativism, xenophobia, even the weaponization of culture is out there as a thing in the environment. And I'm wondering, I would say that probably makes this more important, but it also makes it tougher. And I was wondering if you might want to comment on that.
I would say that before dividing or before using this as a division, as we were talking this morning, identities divide. Well, I guess you need to have an identity at some point because you live in a community, you live in a country, you live in a nation that has an identity of its own. And we see how difficult it is when you have a state with different identities within. So I don't think it's divisive. I just think it's need to be used to learn from the other. And this is when it gets tricky because you need to respect the other. He has not to be just like you. He's going to be different, but we need to understand and to learn to respect our differences.
Isn't it also a reaction, though, and please, Madam Minister, reflect on this too, but isn't it the very idea that cultural diplomacy is not only, it also includes face-to-face. It includes all of us being here together, that you can have both your remote access to cultural diplomacy or indirect, but you must also have a direct experience as well, that they work together.
El choque cultural no puede ser una barrera. Precisamente lo que nos tiene que ayudar es conocernos. Cuando conoces, pierdes.
Know each other. When you get to know each other, you lose the fear. But we also need to be tolerant. We need to respect diversity. When you respect someone in front of you, when you dialogue at all levels, everyone wins. It's very enriching to know the culture of another country because it also will nurture you. And of course, the other person will benefit from getting to know you. When you have an open mind, you know, you can talk about everything, even political aspects. When you have your position, you always need to be able to reach to the other. That's why, you know, cultural shocks happen. But if you know each other, there should be no problems. But sometimes when we are scared, you don't want to get to know the other and you don't want to dialogue, right? And also prejudices. We have many prejudices when we talk about other countries. But then when we are here all together, we all dialogue, we all talk. No matter where we come from, you know, we may be researchers, we may come from the political arena, we may belong to different institutions. But when I'm here and I'm listening to you, I think, oh, that's wonderful. I'm learning new things that I didn't know, and I'm hoping that I'm also inspiring for the others. I heard many people today that inspired me, and when I listened to them, I thought that's a great idea to implement in the Canary Islands.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hisham Aidi. I teach at Columbia University in New York, and also run a cultural center in Tangier, northern Morocco. I want to give some historical perspective. American jazz diplomacy began in 1955, and Morocco was central to that initiative from the start. And there was a cultural center in northern Morocco. There's the American legation in Tangier. There's Voice of America. And there are also a number of cultural centers where Randy Weston and Ornette Coleman and Juice Wilson, a number of jazz musicians came, interacted with Moroccan musicians, and created a genre today known as jazz gnawa, which is the basis of the biggest music festival on the continent. The president is sitting right there, Nela Tezi. We're very proud of that. But I want to emphasize that this wasn't largely state to state. It was also non-state actors, right? And I haven't heard much about non-state actors. So I just want to mention about how to support vulnerable small institutions that play a remarkable role in grassroots diplomacy, but are often left out of the conversation.
Thank you for that. We're going to get one more reaction, and then you can respond to both. Excuse me.
Thank you. Buenas tardes a todos. Soy Luisa Fernanda Gallo. Trabajo para la Comisión Europea.
Work for the European Commission, and I wanted to know your opinion on the use of cultural diplomacy in sectors such as safety, peace building. In Colombia, we have several dialogues with armed groups, for example, between Colombia and Venezuela or Colombia and Ecuador, and actually it has helped to reduce the levels of violence and tension through culture. Culture has the only thing that has decreased these levels of violence, but we don't really see cultural diplomacy as something useful to decrease tensions and maybe something that could be over the table for conversations on peace.
When women has worked with artists to, for instance, battle the misunderstandings in the education of FGM. So they have artists that are singing about very difficult topics to reduce violence, for instance. Let's address that as well as the very history. You must have been the one that put up on the word cloud. But please, to our panelists. Any reaction from what was said or asked?
Well, I would start by saying that this is why precisely I said there are two ways. We have the government way, but we cannot expect the government to do everything for us. We need to do it ourselves as a civil society and to look into the different market. As Duncan was saying, this is huge in California because it touches the economy. So we need to look for ways of making this very productive, meaning earning big money about this. And then it is very hard to put culture and security in the same sentence. So I think that's the reason why this is not a priority and it's not used as a tool of foreign policy. And that is a mistake.
Over here.
Hello, I'm Xavier from IFC. So we have to remind ourselves this is also the sector that is employing more youth, especially NEETs. So it's a very strategic sector for Africa. So the question is how to mobilize more public support and more private investment.
One other reaction here.
Thank you. Yeah, I've rather a comment. Mohammed Ahmed Gaina, university professor and also fellow at the Middle East Institute of Washington. Linking this discussion to this morning's discussion about the question of identity and the sense of belonging, I think that cultural diplomacy serves a purpose of building for a new definition of our togetherness. Mm-hmm. This togetherness takes us to two also main purposes. One is building for the common understanding or interpretation of our values. And second is the recognition of diversity. Diversity is enriching. It is enabling rather than being disabling. And an answer to the question of a successful cultural diplomatic tool, we have a success story in Morocco trying to put cultural diplomacy in one word. It is also capacity building. And we've got this program of training the imams and religious leaders of a moderate, peaceful interpretation of the Islamic religious texts. And these training programs have been transferred to different countries in the Sahel and West Africa, and they proved to be very, very successful to build for a common ground of a peaceful interpretation of the religious texts. Thank you.
Thank you for that example. We appreciate that. I'm going to make it over to this section now. Here, I will hold it for you.
Thank you. My name is Maureen Chibo. I publish Real News Magazine online based in Nigeria. I join in commending the panelists for enriching discussion. But there was something said about Cold War and cultural diplomacy was at the root of how the Cold War was won. But a school of thought will posit that it's communication. And this is where I want to base my question. What will cultural diplomacy be without effective communication through the mass media. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any reactions from the panelists?
I don't want to hog the microphone a lot, but I would just say one thing. During the Cold War, and going back to history, it was not really public diplomacy, it was propaganda mainly. So we cannot call that cultural diplomacy.
Any other reactions? Okay.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, the panel. Great discussion. Rabia Muhtar, Policy Center for the New South, Texas A&M University. Richard, you make a comment that made me feel I need to really look at that comment. You talked about documenting the heritage so that it's not lost. Heritage is useful. Some of this indigenous knowledge, and in particular, one of the panelists mentioned water. This region is a home for thousands of years old water technologies, water management structures that can be useful to today. So I'd like to revisit your sentence. It's not about documenting so that it's not lost. It can actually inform. I mean, I'm a water management professor. Some of the technologies developed then are useful to us today. So it's not about preserving, it's about using and making sure these technologies have withstood the chance of time. They lasted for 2,000 years and they still work. So we need to look at them in that light, not in terms of preserving them for the sake of this is what used to happen. They can be useful today.
How about in a collaborative nation? We both agree on that they're both important. Okay. I have it.
Okay. So I'm Air Vice Marshal Hansen. I work for Gulf of Guinea Maritime.
You had to look down who you work for there.
Gulf of Guinea Maritime. And Rama, a round of applause for this very important presentation on culture. I'm from Ghana. Just recently, we celebrated the 100 years of the return of a king who was exiled to Seychelles. And culture heals. It heals. It supports policy. It explains the assumptions behind strategies. In your research, whether you could relate that Africa had known Europe for over 400 years. If you look at our situation now, which aspects of our culture did we lose? And whether it supports the compensation for the slave trade that we have been asking for several years. Did it come up in your research?
Thank you. You were invoked. Did you want to respond, Rama?
Yeah, I can respond to this question and two others. So about peace and security, I think the answer to that is maybe, I'm not saying because I used to be ambassador to UNESCO, but UNESCO is the UN organization in charge of culture and many other stuff. And UNESCO is underfunded. In the UN network, it's underfunded. And it means something, because UNESCO could play and is playing an important role in terms of peace building, support of arts when there is a conflict somewhere, but they could do much better. And somebody mentioned the recognition of the World Heritage. This is also something that is very important in UNESCO's role. In this city where we are in Rabat, Rabat is in the World Heritage list. C'est une ville qui est reconnue dans le patrimoine mondial de l'humanité, tout comme la Médina de Fès et d'autres endroits encore du Maroc. Parce que cela veut dire que il est important de préserver. Ce que je veux dire, c'est qu'il est important de préserver ces éléments du patrimoine mondial parce que l'UNESCO a un rôle, justement, en termes de paix et de sécurité, et ça passe aussi par son financement. Et c'est là où les États... on se rappelle comment le président américain s'était retiré des engagements de Paris pour le climat. De la même manière, des États se retirent de l'UNESCO en signe de protestation, et cela a des conséquences directes. Ensuite, quelqu'un avait posé la question de savoir comment le public peut soutenir le secteur privé. C'est une question très importante parce que la culture, avec sa traduction économique des industries créatives, c'est vraiment un investissement. Investissement, par exemple, en Côte d'Ivoire, dans le textile, 80% des entreprises textiles sont tenues par des femmes. Donc, investir dans le textile, c'est investir dans des petites entreprises tenues par des femmes en Côte d'Ivoire. Je pense aussi important que les États investissent dans les écoles de formation, parce que l'art, c'est pas juste une œuvre, c'est des théâtres, c'est des cinémas, c'est des réseaux de distribution, c'est des infrastructures, c'est les droits de propriété intellectuelle dont je parlais tout à l'heure. Et l'acteur vraiment important au niveau continental qui finance ce secteur, c'est Afreximbank, qui en 2001 avait décidé de mettre 500 millions dans les industries créatives et puis a doublé récemment ce montant. Mais ce n'est évidemment pas assez. Après, la dernière question sur les réparations. Bon, ça c'est toujours effectivement à cause de l'esclavage, le coût de la traite n'a pas été seulement humain, il a aussi été culturel. Et c'est tout le débat sur la question des réparations. Et c'est aussi tout le débat de la question de la restitution des biens. C'est-à-dire la restitution des œuvres d'art africains qu'on retrouve dans les musées occidentaux. Et,
France, because it has reacted to the report, and other states, European states, but also Asian states, with processes of restitution of works of arts that have been taken from such countries. And I think that we'll have to continue that way. There's a lot of reluctance, not to say resistance, with often, I don't know what you think about it, often we have been hearing, of course, we're not going to give you back these sculptures because you won't know how to, lame excuses. You don't have any museums to the tune of them, of course. So, yeah. Now then, I would leave it to you to answer. But it is true that this is a question which is fundamental. And in Africa also, underpinning this idea is not only the restitution or return of a work of art. Well, it comes back to the roots. So it's kind of the story. Monsieur le ministre,
différentes interrogations qui...
You can see the different presentations that have taken place showcases again the wealth, the riches, and the strength of this culture. We're talking about conflict resolution, we're talking about gastronomy, we're talking about interstate relations, because when we're talking about restitution of goods, so it means a state that claims them back. So we're talking about economy and investment. This riches today, we're talking about khataras. You're right, khataras is a goods today that we are protected in the Kingdom of Morocco, not only as heritage, but also as solution with respect to some regions of Morocco, of the Kingdom that need water, because the solutions of yesteryears was very good. In Marrakesh and Rashidia, some of these khataras, they have not only a heritage role, but also a social and economic role. This is why several departments are now working, and several departments within the Kingdom of Morocco today support this cultural policy, which is wide. Earlier, I was talking about education. Education is an integral part of culture, so its budget falls under culture. The higher education is also related and under the culture. Talking about water. Water today, the restitution of these khataras has become also essential in some regions of Morocco. So it's a part of culture. With our friend of the World Bank, we're now pondering on investment projects because culture has become, we were talking about gaming, $300 billion. What about Morocco? And how about Africa? Today, thanks to the cultural diplomacy, these are American movies, Mexican movies, Spanish, French movies that are being shot and made in Morocco. So this is part of the cultural diplomacy. So it's a joint investment which is being based and bringing the populations and communities closer thanks to and through these investments. This wealth and riches today, either we need to use this tool to bring in more peace the world over, the earth over, or simply to be used for purposes of power, might, and imposing one's culture on the other, which is not the essence of the culture. Through its wealth and through its history, in Morocco, several communities which sometimes would not want to understand one another. If you read this kingdom's history, it's Amazirs, it's the Arabs, it's the Jews, it's the Muslims. Recently, we've discovered in Shala necropolis, only 40 years ago, Christians' tombs. So these different religions that have coexisted, that have lived together here on this Moroccan land and still continue. So these are different colors, different sheens. And we are this very Morocco. It's a small Morocco world that really can make a living and in good intelligence. And so this must be marketed, sold, saying that in order to forge ahead together, we can, without creating more conflicts and without really wanting to be superior. It is superiority that kind of kills the culture. Man.
Of our interventions there. 15 seconds, because we are at the end of our day, and I want to make sure to get to two emerging leaders as well, okay? Please.
I will try. My name is Ambassador Mohamedou Ka from the Gambia, Ambassador of Gambia in Switzerland and the UN. I think what proved my preempt to the question is what I've heard that is very key and central to diplomacy, of culture, which is intellectual property, and the role of multilateral diplomacy and institutions such as the World Intellectual Property Organization. Our creators and designers from the cultural heritage and cultural expressions have been forever exploited and not protected. It took us over a decade for us to convene 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago in Riyadh for the diplomatic conference to finally come up with a design law treaty, which is a very significant diplomatic win. So the role of multilateral diplomacy and ensuring that intellectual property is rooted within our creators and cultural expression so that the traditional knowledge and traditional designers can be protected and reduce the exploitations from external actors. And to what extent should the Atlantic Dialogue ensure that intellectual property as it relates to multilateral diplomacy and culture is central?
Thank you. 15 seconds. 15 seconds. Nope, you raised your hand.
No, thank
I have
you.
to go to emerging leaders. I must go to emerging leaders.
So hi, everyone. My name is Natalie DeLille, and I am Haitian American. And so I'm going back to something my colleague said earlier, where she talked about we have to start capitalizing of the strengths of the Global South. And something I've taken away is just like we are so culturally rich. And so I'm wondering, what are your reactions to how technology can help protect our culture, but also using that as a way to participate in the global technological advancements that are happening?
Thank you. 15 seconds. I have to stay on time.
Perfect. Thank you. My name is Florencio. I'm from Colombia, also one of the emerging leaders. And I think one of the concepts that was mentioned during the panel was migration. And in this context, another element that has been increasing is diaspora diplomacy. And I see the diaspora as ambassadors of their culture in their host countries. So I would like to know, and my question is from the panel, is how you see cultural diplomacy as a way or as a tool to promote more positive narrative, especially in those times that are more challenging for people and culture on the move.
I want to thank everybody for your questions. I know that I missed this part. I know I completely missed this side, but we're out of time. I tried to make it around the entire room. But guess what? Our panelists will be here for the rest of this conference, so please do interact with them. I must finish with this question. As you know, our great visionary here at Atlantic Dialogues, the new Policy Center for the New South, is Karim El-Noui. He is, I heard, going to be traveling the world as he always does, and he's going to be taking a capsule with him, and that capsule is to represent cultural diplomacy and the heritage and the richness of the Global South. What will you give him to put in this capsule as Karim travels the world? And you only have 15 seconds to give me what you're going to put in the capsule. 15 seconds, please.
Vous parlez.
You are speaking to the Minister of Culture for a country who is about 2 centuries old. I mentioned it earlier, but I will mention it for the third time. For me, the core idea I would like to leave you with from everything we have discussed today, there are two key concepts that we have heard multiple times, something that represents who we are in the Moroccan kingdom. It's the parallel between authenticity and modernity. And this notion, our previous king, His Majesty Hassan II, has also and always emphasized the importance of our cultural heritage, but also going forward to...
I have it.
Yeah,
So
what are
I
you going
have-
to put in? Yes.
I'm going to give him my chapter on heritage diplomacy as a tool of foreign policy, not to think only at restitution as a tool, but to think about how to use the diaspora that is there.
And you put it on a thumb drive.
Yeah.
That's right. How about you?
Yo dejaría escrito cosas que...
I would leave everything written down, everything that we've learned throughout history, things that we have to improve and things that we don't want to do.
That capsule that Kareem's taking is not too heavy yet. Okay, what are you going to put in the capsule?
A book, maybe? A book? Yes, so you will have time to read.
Yeah.
Okay, a book.
Yeah.
And what book would it be?
The book I always read is the General History of Africa.
Very good. I would put in the capsule the video of Atlantic Dialogues 2024 for him to take around, for people to watch the discussion that's happening here. Thank you all
Good
for
idea.
being part of this conversation.
Under the high patronage of His Majesty King Mohammed VI, the Policy Center for the New South is organizing the 13th edition of the Atlantic Dialogues Conference, scheduled to take place from December 12th to 14th, 2024, in Rabat, Morocco. This flagship event will convene over 400 distinguished leaders from the public and private sectors, civil society, international organizations, think tanks, and the media across the Atlantic Basin, fostering open and candid discussions on pivotal cross-regional and cross-sectoral challenges. This year's conference marks a significant evolution, transitioning from annual thematic focuses to a broader, more inclusive approach emphasizing the wider Atlantic space's core values and strategic importance. The agenda will delve into critical topics such as geoeconomics, regional security, democracy, migration, and the energy transition, with a particular emphasis on the African Atlantic region. Participants will engage in over 11 plenary sessions, interactive town halls, thematic breakout dinners, and intimate night owl sessions, all designed to encourage meaningful dialogue. The Atlantic Dialogues Emerging Leaders 2024 program will bring together more than 40 young changemakers across the